Rise and shine to the breakfast of champions. I am Tim Mosso, and I am back, ready to wake you up with watches. Today we have an incredible spread, and if there's one unifying theme, it's great brands and blue dials. Naturally, there are exceptions. Quick wrist check. If you're absolutely new to the show, then you've probably never seen my Zen Easy M11. 43mm tegmented steel, 60-minute radial chronograph display, modified 7750. It is a lefty chronograph with a rotating bezel and a 500-piece limited series. And just because this has been on my set forever, and this will become the official resting place of my glasses on the set when I retire them. Management says it's time. This is my Bird Vaillet skull with repurposed watch and clock parts set in lucite. And the way we're going to do this in the future is we're simply going to retire my glasses to a placeholder perch. Now, let's talk about the watches on the table because I have some sensational selections, including the A. Lange & Söhne Big 3, starting with the Datograph. Now, this is the 2012 to present Datograph Up-Down. It's important to note that the Datograph Up-Down is a watch that is slightly larger than the original 39mm Dato, and the dial layout has been changed somewhat, principally in order to accommodate the power reserve scale down at 6 o'clock. Now, the 41mm case does wear larger. It does appear, however, to be thicker than it is. It looks like it could be a Planet Ocean, but it's only 13.5mm. So you'll find, despite the outward size of the watch, it does wear quite well on a smaller wrist. It's about 48.5mm lug to lug. And yes, the watch is in solid platinum. The dial is complex. As you can see, the registers are dropped relative to the cannon pinion to a lower position on the dial, and rather than being silver, they're more of a champagne color with a concentric snailing. The dial, of course, including its flange, made of solid sterling silver and then black galvanized to create that intense dark coloration. It's a substantial watch on the wrist, but it retains all the original character of the original Datograph and the functionality, including the flyback chronograph capability. For those who love the tactile sensations of high horology, this watch has both a column wheel chrono and a very precise, one might even say buttery smooth push-button indexing system for the big date. Turn it all over, and by the way, look at the depth of that dial, and it's loomed. But you have caliber L9516. The 9516 is a modification of the original Datograph caliber, with the main change being the addition of substantial power reserve. The original Dato was a manual wind with a 36-hour power reserve. This one will run for 60. Still a big slow-beating 18,000 vibration per hour balance. Andrew, if we can get super close here, I'm going to hold it absolutely steady, and we're going to cycle the chronograph. So you can see the column wheel and you can see the lateral clutch. Note the lateral clutch is fully jeweled. Not just that, but the driving wheel is a jewel set and screw fixed chaton. You'll notice more on the chronograph bridge as well as on the chronograph center bridge. Now, of course, the movement all in German silver with the exception of steel for the screws and the chronograph levers. Those feature black polish for screws and satin finish for steel levers, freehand engraved half bridge for the balance, and an overcoil hairspring. That's not a standard feature on Lange watches, but you will find it on the Dato, a timepiece that simply overwhelms in every way and one of the most important families of modern chronograph. That said, I promised you the Lange Big 3, which means Datograph and Lange 1. The Lange 1 was one of the first 4 Lange production models in the modern era, launched at Dresden Castle back in 1994, October of 1994 if I'm not mistaken. And this watch right here is the Lange 1 Luminous, not to be mistaken for the Lumen. This is a Lange 1 with a loomed dial, including power reserve, by the way. The dial is still sterling silver with a matte finish. There's a very fine satin finish, circular concentric around the hour track as well as around the constant seconds. The watch with a 3-day manual wind power reserve, a case 38.5mm, and you can see it wears easily on the wrist. It does have a substantial heft thanks to the precious metal case and the matching precious metal dial. Turn the watch over and you can see the old caliber 9.0. 9.0 being the year work started. After the fall of the wall, Lange started working on its modern calibers. 4 years later, this was part of the original family of Lange watches in the modern era, along with the Arcade, the Saxonia, and the Pour le Mérite Tourbillon. Now you can see those lovely gradient stripes across the bridges. Brighter on one side, darker on the other. That's the sign of true abrasive wheel stripes. They're not Côte de Genève, we're in Saxony, remember. Now you can also see that there's a 3/4 style bridge in the fashion of old Saxon pocket watches, watches, including the jewels set in chaton, and you can see everything from the barrel down to the train jewels are actually fixed to the bridges using screws rather than press fit. This is an old pocket watch construction method, but look closely and you'll see modern finishing standards, including a mirrored beveling or anglage chamfer around the edges of the access ports, as well as the edge of the half bridge and the three-quarter bridge. Now, the screws are alternately black polished for some functional screws, such as those in the swan's neck regulator, or fire blued, and the golden material you see across the bridges is unplated German silver or nickel, copper, and zinc, with the copper giving it that golden hue. You can see, as with the Dado, you have a freehand engraved half bridge for the balance, beaten away at 21.6 rather than the 18K of the Dado. Now, I promised you the big three. What is the third watch? There are no surprises here, folks. Of course, it's going to be the Zeitwerk, the last of our big three to be introduced. This one bowed back in 2009, and it was instantly a GPHG laureate. Now, the timepiece is a digital jumping hour, tens of minute, and single-digit minute jumper. Of course, you can manipulate in either direction, and note, despite the exotic complication, the watch has conventional hacking seconds. We will advance to the maximum, right the turn of the hour. And the watch is not just a jumping minute, tens of minute, an hour with a power reserve. It also features a constant force system. As with FP Journe, Lange uses a remontoir d'égalité, and it takes the form of two third wheels with a hairspring sandwiched in between. You have a Maltese cross system for stopping the barrel when it no longer has enough energy to jump the minutes. You have a pinwheel, effectively an air brake, to slow down the energy as it surges through the jumper mechanism into a sort of time bridge that conveys the energy to the constant force hairspring. Finally, it's meted out in those quantized bursts through the constant force device to the escapement, so that it always receives the same amount of torque. Now, turning the watch over, you can see the watch preloads the minute jumper, and as it is about to turn, you will see the full turn of the hour. Just like that, jumping back to the case, the reason that there's a remontoir here is not just to keep good time, it achieves that goal, but also to prevent the enormous power of that mainspring from flying through and damaging the escapement through the train. It should be mentioned that one side of this mainspring, because it is such a massive and powerful mainspring, one side of the spring is actually anchored to the bridge of the watch itself, and winding a Zeitwerk is one of the great tactile pleasures in all of high horology connoisseurship. Quite simply, it feels like you're turning over a Model T Ford. So much resistance is there. But not just resistance, there's a wonderful indexing from the click, so that it's not just stiff, it's absolutely satisfying to use. And on the dial side, the frame for the minute jumper and the constant seconds, that is actually part of the movement. German silver as well, but it's been silvered to better match the dial, and you can see that there's actually a pivot jewel for the minutes display adjacent to the two discs depicting the minutes. All right, the big three from Lange. Let's go down market a bit, though not terribly far, to the world of entry-level independent horology. Now, at FP Journe since 2009, the official entry-level watch has been a legend in its own right. The most requested watch at FP Journe's manufacturer is his most basic mechanical timepiece, the Chronomètre Bleu, better known as the CB, or simply the Stunner. The watch is an incredible combination of cream hues for the printing of the dial, iridescent blue metallic lacquer dial that simply defies any description or attempt at it, and then a case of polished tantalum, a lovely blue-gray metal that's rarely used because it tends to deform under pressure and it tends to destroy the tooling with which it is crafted. I can tell you that, having visited FP Journe's case and dial factory, both the process for the dial as well as case production are forbidden from photography, and I was not even allowed to watch as the case was finished. 39 millimeters, turn it all over, and you have a glorious 18-karat rose gold caliber 1304. Now, a few things to call out. Two mainspring barrels in order to even out the torque flowing to the escapement, a free-sprung balance beating away at 21.6, a 56-hour power reserve, and you'll note that there is an invisible train. That is, you cannot see the intermediate wheels that are conveying the energy to the escape wheel. There's the barrels, there's the escapement and the balance, and then there's a channel in between featuring a lovely Grand Doge, or barley corn. So you have Côte de Genève, the barley corn, you have a sun ray graining on the crown wheel as well as the barrels, and then you have a lovely engine-turned perlage below the balance. And if you look closely, those triple finishes will each reflect light differently. Now, one distinct feature of this watch is that it does have a fat, broad, and easily accessible anglage, so you can see the chamfer of the bridges without using a loop. So not only is it a stunning sight, but it is a stunning sight that requires no particular optics to enjoy. This one is naked eye. And yes, as the watch is called Chronomet without a COSC certification, Journe insists that the watch runs better than the COSC spec. Adjusted in 6 positions, I've tested the theory, and he's a man of his word. Throw this one on the wrist, and you can see that it is quite flat, being well under 10 millimeters thick, but broad across the wrist. It has a saucer-like shape and easily fits underneath the cuff. One of the highlights of the case design is the domed bezel that makes the watch even easier to slide beneath a tight sleeve. And we'll jump back real quick because I don't think I did a wrist shot with the Zeitwerk. It is the largest of our big 3 Lange timepieces, 50 millimeters lug to lug, just over 13 millimeters thick, and 42 millimeters in diameter. This is a grail watch of mine, one of the few that I still consider to be something of a dream, and that not just in my mind, but on my wrist. It's as fabulous when I encounter it firsthand. It's one of the few heroes that I've met who stood taller, more imposing, and more spectacular than even my imagination projected. All right, let's jump into the most mainstream of mainstream brands, but in a form you've likely not seen before. This is perhaps the most charismatic Air King I've ever encountered. This is reference 114234, white gold fluted bezel. You have a combination of concentric satin finished blue metallic hour track with white bordered orange radially arrayed Arabic numerals. You have a single white gold and inverted radially arrayed Arabic numeral at 6 o'clock, the 5-point Rolex crown in white gold at 12, and then you have the concentric dial. If you've heard of the concentric dial on Rolex watches, that's what it is. It's not so much a graining like satin graining on the hour track. This is more of a stamped pattern that has 3 dimensions to it and does incredible things with light, almost like light across a brand new vinyl record. It's truly a spectacular watch to see. Now throw it on the wrist and you can see, though it's a 34 millimeter unisex size, it works well on a smaller wrist. My wrist's 16 centimeters in circumference. I can recommend this watch for any wrist size. There's no lower limit to size, and I would say at about 17 centimeters that would top out the wrist for which I would recommend this case size. Being an oyster case, it's broad cushion-like and a little bit easier to pass off as a 36 or a 37. It doesn't look like a 34 on the wrist, and that's kind of the rule with Rolex oysters. They wear large. That is one of my favorite 3-hand Rolex watches. And note, this is not just a 3-hand, but it is a balanced 3-hand, bereft of date and cyclops eye. Beautifully balanced. I even like the way the superlative chronometer, officially certified, and Oyster Perpetual are arrayed in circular fashion, round robin, ringing the dial, rather than simply printing a book below as Rolex does on every other model. This watch just reeks of imagination, redolent of flair and originality. And I rarely say that about Rolex watches. Now, let's talk about the most canonical of Rolex watches, but in a form we don't often discuss on this show. This is the Rolex Submariner, the 116618 in full yellow gold, a timepiece with a spectacular yellow gold and Cerachrom black ceramic bezel. It features a matching black lacquer dial with yellow gold hands and indices. Now this is a timepiece that is a 40, but I have to warn you, both in terms of heft on the wrist and physical presence, it wears more like a 42 or a 43 on the watch, and that's the key to Rolex watches in the modern era. They look bigger than they are, but they do wear fairly true to size. If you could wear the 5-digit sub, you can still wear this 6-digit sub. That said, it's going to feel and look like a larger watch, even if, strictly speaking, the lug-to-lug makes this wearable on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. Now, it has all of the inherent qualities of a sub. It's 12.7 millimeters thick, so cuffable. It is 300 meters water resistant. It has a wonderful bezel detent, and of course, it has not Easy Link, but Glide Lock inside the clasp. You could see that you've got 20 millimeters of adjustability in 2 millimeter increments. So you have the ability to slide and, as they say, glide the sizing of the watch. So you have the ability to incrementally adjust if you're simply sizing the watch for any given moment or any given wrist, or you have the ability to pull it all the way out and extend over a dive suit. And that's the great thing about Glide Lock. It gives you that flexibility. It's not all or nothing. Once more on the wrist, you can see from farther away how it plays. It's a lot of gold. And it's important to see a watch like this from a distance because up close, even a pale yellow gold is going to overwhelm. I don't think this watch is outrageous. I think it's a judicious combination of black and yellow hues that comes across as something a cut above a standard Rolex watch. There's a wonderful urbane richness to this timepiece that I don't always ascribe to full gold watches on full bracelets. I think this has a versatility in a second gear that a conventional, for example, full yellow gold sports watch generally would not. And I'm speaking to you, Hublot. All right. Let's jump away from Rolex before jumping back and talking about what might be my favorite 39mm Royal Oak chronograph. From Audemars Piguet, this is the reference 26300. It was part of the final family of 39mm Royal Oak chronos. So you've got a Frederic Piguet 1185 inside, doing business as Audemars Piguet caliber 2385, vertical clutch column wheel, automatic wind, 40-hour power reserve, screw-down crowns and pushers, 50 meters water resistant, but critically, you have a 39mm case with the most expressive of dials. It's almost like Audemars Piguet took a lesson from Rolex in crafting this particular reference. That color scheme is unconventional, but if you're a Mets fan or a Bears fan, you might find it to your liking. I happen to just find it wonderfully lush, wonderfully jubilant. It has an elan about it that's often lacking in stolid and serious high horology timepieces. Now, of course, this is a timepiece with a Grand Tapisserie dial, so cut on a pantograph lathe. This is not one of the offshore stamped dials. H series of relatively recent production, but remember that the 39mm chrono was dead as of 2012, so all of these pieces, not quite vintage yet, but increasingly scarce, in excellent condition and unrefinished. Now the watch as a 39 wears more like a 42, and that's always been the way with the Royal Oak. Although under 10mm thick, it's about 9.2 on the wrist, it is broad, and with the integration of case, flank, lug, and bracelet, it has the look of a larger timepiece, which is why I always say when you're buying a Royal Oak or an offshore, size down. Buy a watch that's one size below what you would ordinarily purchase in a round case size. And of course, the finish inside and out of this watch is everything you would expect from a Royal Oak. From the case back and its multiple finishes and engraving, to the bracelet and its perfectly aligned flanking bevel that runs completely aligned from link to link and then reaches the lug hood where it expands and then diminishes at the midcase. All of this executed by hand. A big part of what you pay for when you buy this watch is the hand finishing of the dial, the case, the bezel, and the bracelet. And I've always said the difference between luxury horology, which is something like a Rolex or Omega, and high horology is going to be the investment of manual skills in assembly, in finishing, in regulation, and that watch has all three. Now let's talk about a brand that's a bit smaller than anything we've called out on the table, but perhaps the most innovative on the show tonight. I've spoken often of Ressence, of Belgium. They're of Antwerp, Belgium, but they build their watches in Switzerland, and their watches are like nothing else going. The timepiece is essentially a German silver dial, several discs, planetary geared, that spin independently, and it's an orbital system that is also a regulator. As you can see right now, I have aligned the hour display at 12, the index for the minutes at 60. We have a constant seconds runner, and then we have a day of the week indicator. So it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on the day of the week indicator. It moves in a clockwise direction. Now, if I were to advance the time, we are now looking at 12:30. And we know we're looking at 12:30 just after noon, because you can see that the day of the week indicator is dead centered on the partial arc that represents our day. As it moves toward the end of that individual arc, you know you're looking at PM. So not only do you have the day of the week, but you effectively have an AM-PM indicator. Now let me play with this a little bit, because if you've never seen one of these, it's simply a ball to play with them, and also quite interesting to see how they operate, with everything in constant motion, at the same time spinning on its own axis. It's a little bit like the solar system in microcosm on your wrist. Now you will note the watch has an expansive crystal that's essentially edge to edge on the 42mm grade 5 titanium case, wire lugs, and a case-back setting system that was phased in after 2017. It debuted on the Type 1 squared. Well, this is the traditional round case, but with that innovation to make it easier if you wish to manually wind the watch from the case back. It is an automatic, but do all of the setting from the case back because the timepiece has no conventional crown. Throwing it on the wrist, you can see it actually wears smaller than a 42. If the Rolex is a 40 that wears like a 42, this is a 42 that wears like a 40. The finishing on the dial, as you can see, is explosive, not simply exciting, not simply radiant. This has an effervescence about it that's almost like a life of its own. And in that respect, it shares that quality with the Chronomètre Bleu. As you can see, both of these products of low volume independence, both making between 500 and 900 watches a year, they are getting maximum mileage out of the reflective character of their dials. God is in the details here, and specifically, the details are in the dials. By the way, if you're wondering what powers the Resonance module, the Resonance module has 107 pieces on the Type 1 and 15 joules. It sits on top of a 25 joule ETA 2824. So you get the Resonance machine on the top and the ETA machine on the bottom, giving you a tank-tough, universally serviceable, and reliable tractor caliber for the complication. Okay, break from our blue dials for a bit to a brand that I love sincerely. But this is a Reverso as you've never seen it. First, this is the Grand Reverso case. 46.5 millimeter lug-to-lug. It's a case size that originally was introduced in 2002 on the 1 year late 70th anniversary Septentième Reverso. Now, this timepiece also uses the same basic movement with 8-day power reserve. What sets this one apart is that it has a wonderful jumping digital case-back power reserve. The case-back power reserve traces the 8-day reserve manually wound of the watch, and you can see when you get down to your last day, you get a big red 1, the oldest unit in the U.S. Army, and a sign that your watch is down to 24 hours of endurance. Now turn it all over, and you can see that it is a Grand Reverso, conventionally rendered on the dial side. Easy to read, Art Deco style vertically arrayed numerals with simple font, a satin finish. There's a wonderful curtain-like roll of rose lathe guilloche at the center, and then you can see you have a square within a square that is the sub-seconds dial with a lovely satin finish for the hour track. Throw the watch on the wrist, and you realize just how different a Reverso is on an integrated bracelet. It's not a product of Gerald Genta. In fact, the Reverso on the bracelet was a thing before Gerald Genta had even sketched his first dial. So this is a timepiece that does well to integrate that lug profile, which has always been traditionally conical and sloping, with a bracelet that closes the gap to the flank of the case. Now, the watch is wonderfully compact, being only 46.5 millimeters lug to lug. It wears easily on a wrist. The bracelet is incredibly substantial. Eyes closed, I would swear this is a 36 millimeter platinum Rolex. It's that impressive. The tolerances of the case rotating mechanism and the spring-loaded ball bearings involved give it a wonderful crisp snap as I close it. And I'm going to hold it up to the mic so you can hear exactly what that's like. It's impressive stuff. Finally, this watch, less than 11 millimeters thick, is wonderfully compact on the wrist, and even a small wrist of 13.5 centimeters can wear this watch. It's 29.4 millimeters from 9 to 3, not including the crown. Now, JLC's clasp and bracelet system, both are brilliant. First, it is a quadruple trigger system, so you have to press all 4 triggers to open the clasp completely. But there is also, if you look very closely, there is a micro adjustment increment on both sides of the clasp to give you a total of 5 millimeters of adjustment. So you have 2 Easy Link style micro adjustments inside the bracelet itself. And you can see how imposing that bracelet is. That's a lot of rose gold and a wonderful way to get into a full bracelet timepiece without going the route of the usual suspects. Let's jump back to one of the usual suspects, because I feel like, if anything, this is the GMT that doesn't get enough hype. This is last year's GMT Master 2 BLRO in white gold. Now the only way you can get a Pepsi on an oyster bracelet, 40 millimeters white gold with that lovely pastel-toned bezel. It features a blue dial. Now this watch originally launched in white gold with a black dial in 2014 to differentiate it Further, from last year's Steel Pepsi, you get the oyster bracelet now, the only way to get an oyster bracelet on a Pepsi GMT, and you get the blue dial now. The blue dial is a lush and bottomless lacquer. Let me remove some of my fingerprints here, because when you see it in all of its majesty, it doesn't look like lacquer. It looks like bottomless enamel. It's glossy, gleaming. You can see the indentation in the lacquer around the cannon pinion at center, and to a lesser extent around the Cyclops eye, and it shows you just how thick this gloss lacquer really is. It's something special. You can see your reflection in it, and this watch, although by no means a cheap timepiece, sells far closer to its true value pre-owned than do any of the steel models. Throw it on the wrist, and you can see, as with the Submariner, this is the super case, a 40 that looks, and in terms of mass, especially in white gold, feels more like a 42 or a 43. It is an impressive watch, and in my opinion, the most appealing current GMT model. Yes, I'd take the blue dial even over the white gold meteorite. I just feel there's a better coherence about this design. Speaking of blue dials on pilots' watches, especially pilots' watches rooted in the mid-50s, we began to see the first GMTs and the first Breguet Type 20s back in late 1954, and this right here is the 3800 BR, 39 millimeters in rose gold. It is a automatic flyback chronograph, 100 meters water resistant, and you can see this is the Aeronavale, because unlike its date counterpart, the Transatlantique, this Type 20 has no date on its dial, true to the original watch. Now, what it also features is an aviator-style bi-directional rotating bezel, so you can use this as a 60-minute timing organ. Just line up the index with the minute hand. Now you can time two events, one with the chronograph and one with the bezel. And because the chronograph features a big eye style register, it's easier to read than on a conventional balanced tri-register chronograph. So I think I need to wind this one a little bit. It is simply easier to read the minutes of this chronograph register, making it broadly a more practical watch. Now we'll jump back to that dial in just a moment, but I want to show you the clasp, which is substantial, all of high polish, and along with the case back and the bracelet, handsomely executed with no detail left unseen and unconsidered. This is 100 meters water resistant, so one of the rare pilot style watches with which you can swim with abandon. Now the case flank is very much Breguet. Coined flanks, cold rolled and then hand finished. You have that beaded bezel design from the 1950s with a little bit of a conical profile and a lovely domed sapphire, and you can see just how dramatically domed the sapphire is. Turning back to the dial side, you can see this is a different type of blue. It's not the metallic gloss of the black polished and then lacquered FP Journe, nor is it exactly the deep multi-coat lacquer of the Rolex. This is more of a harsh metallic with a sunburst, and I like that. It has an electric blue severity that, in combination with the cream-colored calibrations, makes it look wonderfully rich and warm. Now, there is that caliber 582 flyback chronograph based on the Lange 1340, so this one has pedigree and real history behind it inside and out. Throw it on the wrist, and all I can say is it's a wonderful timepiece for a small wrist. I can recommend this watch, which is under 46 millimeters lug to lug, but I can recommend it for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. So not only is it an imposing and historically significant watch from a great brand, but it's an actual unisex option. A wonderful timepiece that you can wear just about anywhere. The rose gold, the blue of the dial, and the cream of the numerals and the lume on the hands makes this watch for me. I have to say that is a Breguet with which I identify. A lot of Breguets seem like technically proficient executions of watchmaking theory, but they don't have that visceral emotional grip of Speedmasters and Submariners and GMTs and Daytonas. That said, Daytonas do have their place. I like traditionally sized watches that anyone can wear, which is why I love this 40mm Zenith era Daytona alongside the 39mm rose gold Breguet. They're very different looks for different aesthetic sensibilities. And I have to say, right now, folks ask, which of the three recent Daytonas should I buy? Should I buy the 1990s Zenith powered watch? Should I buy the in-house steel bezel made from 2000 to 2015? Or should I buy the current 2016 to present ceramic bezel steel watch? Buy the Daytona. with the Zenith movement by the caliber 4030. This is the one I recommend. Now this one's a 1996 serial number, and you can see it features the penultimate iteration of this dial, which has the tritium stamp, but you can also see that it features a conventional 6 rather than the inverted 6 that wound up looking like a 9. So the final version of this dial would have been post 1998 with Luminova. This one's original tritium with a lovely black on white contrasting register design. The Zenith version of this watch is the one to get for a very specific reason: rarity. Zenith in the 90s could make about 25 to 35,000 movements a year, of which some of them were El Primero, some of them were Elite. Some of them went to the Rolex project, which had its own room for sub-assembly and finishing and regulation, and some of them went to Zenith's own watches. Still others among that El Primero production went to customers, meaning when you broke out the total number of Zenith movements that could be put into Rolex Daytonas, you wound up with a number much, much lower on an annual basis than ultimate production of the in-house caliber Daytonas. Any in-house caliber Daytonas. So these are not bubble watches. I believe these will retain their value even as the in-house calibers take a big punch to the gut when inevitably macroeconomic factors and sobriety intercede in current value surges. So this is the one to buy when taking the long view. It's also a wonderful nostalgic reminder that there was a time even when mighty Rolex relied on customer calibers. Speaking of classical references, I did mention Speedmasters, didn't I? Well, we've seen enough moonwatches on this show. Nevertheless, I've got a professional for you of a different color, or perhaps I should say, a different shape. Launched in 1969, the Speedmaster Professional Mark II was designed in the 60s, but its look is of the 70s. Now here you can see the original tritium matte dial. Lovely, real patina, no faux tina here. And you can see that this one, powered by the classic Moonwatch caliber 861, is the real deal. It still has the original printed tachymeter underneath the flange of the crystal, and you will note there's a wonderful depth to this dial. The photos you see online don't do justice to the depth of this dial, from the bezel down to the tack, down to the dial base and the wells of the registers. Now it's 41.5 millimeters from 3 to 9 o'clock, not including the crown, and you can see that it's a rather chunky timepiece, but it's only 45 millimeters lug to lug, which means that this watch, which I can say with confidence has been minimally refinished, but it's easy to wear because although it's a huge tonneau-like hood on the wrist, it's very compact from side to side. You can see I've got about 5 millimeters of clearance on both sides of this case, so my wrist wears this one easily. And we talked about unisex options. If you're a lady with a penchant for luxury and you want something that's a bit different, vintage perhaps, this is a way to get a watch that'll fit, and no need to go quartz, no need to go diamond studded, no need to go modern, and no need to go ladies watch. This is a great watch for anyone to own, whether it's the crowning glory of your vintage collection, the anchor of your Omega collection, or simply one of the greats to add to a collection of milestone watches. This one deserves to be in the discussion and on your wrist. And because back in 1957, the first Speedmaster was part of the Seamaster water-resistant watch family, you have the image of the seahorse or hippocampus on the back to remind you of the DNA lineage of this model. And you could see there's nothing to hide, any imperfection, any mark, any oil, any evidence of bad watchmaking on this dial or the hands. You could see how clean, antiseptic even, right down to the vintage Omega logo and Speedmaster script. That's a great survivor. Changing gears, we go from big, chunky, and vintage to contemporary, slim, and complicated. This, launched in 2017, is the Vacheron Constantin Patrimony Moon Phase retrograde date. Now, the watch features a retrograding date, and I'm going to give you the pleasure of instant gratification, and I am going to advance and jump the retrograde. This is a watch, 42.5 millimeters in rose gold, that debuted back in 2017, and it's the best of everything Vacheron in one package. That is just too much fun. And note, you need no tool or pusher adjuster to advance that complication. Now, throwing the watch on the wrist, you can see it has a lovely, almost pebbly texture to its opaline silver dial with rose gold cabochon outboard for reading the minutes, and a lovely, polished and glossy gold moon phase amid a varnished deposited base of blue in a crescent-style moon phase with age of moon indicator. Turn it all over, you can see this is based on the 2450 Geneva Hallmark Vacheron manufacturer automatic caliber, Geneva Hallmark, 5-position adjustment like a chronometer, and note the use of rose lathe guilloche, not stamping, but rose lathe guilloche on the 22 karat winding mass. For that matter, note the 22 karat, not 21, not 18 karat winding mass, maximum polar moment, and maximum precious metal. Throw it on the wrist, and obviously this is a timepiece of a larger scale for a dress watch. Being 42.5 millimeters, this is one for the larger wrist or those who have a taste for a broader, bolder, I would say more audacious watch. This is well within the realm of audacity. Vacheron traditionally is a company that makes expressive lugs, traditional sizes, dress watches. And, well, this watch has expressive lugs. It's a dress watch, but it is not a traditional size. I would say if you've got a really big wrist or you like a full-figured watch on your wrist with no penalty to be paid in thickness, the watch is nice and thin, as you can see. This is a watch that gives you a lot of presence without the bombast of something like an Hublot or a Royal Oak Offshore. That's a really handsome piece. Now, I should mention that if you want to go JLC, you have your options on the table tonight, and this is probably the least commonly seen of the Great Six Rose Gold limited edition complicated reversos. The first was the 60th anniversary reverso with a date, a power reserve, and a 14 karat rose gold movement back in 1991. Each of the limited editions of 500 pieces in the Grand Taille case, 42 millimeters by 26 millimeters. This is the perpetual calendar. The last of the series to be released, it launched in the year 2000, so it's a millennial reference. You have a day-night indicator, effectively your danger zone indicator, constant seconds, you have the quantième bissextile, or the leap year cycle indicator. Turn it all over, and you can see that you have a perpetual calendar, a rarity for JLC. It's an in-house JLC perpetual, not the IWC Kurt Klaus system, and you rarely see the in-house JLC perpetuals. You saw them on the Triptyque Reverso, on this model back in 2000, and for example, on the Gyro Tourbillon 1. So not only is it an in-house perpetual calendar, but it features a retrograde date, a moon phase with age of the moon, and if you note carefully, you'll see that the calendar is francophone. It is in French, the native language of Jaeger-LeCoultre in the canton of Vaud, Vallée du Jeu. So a lovely timepiece with a wonderful curtain-like rose lathe guilloche bounding these satin-finished registers. It is gorgeous. It is wearable. It is all Jaeger-LeCoultre, inside and out. Even the perpetual calendar, the base movement, the case made by JLC at its own dial factory, and in the Grand Taille case size, it wears easily. This is a timepiece only 42.2 millimeters lug to lug, so I recommend it for any wrist size. It's wonderfully thin at under 10 millimeters thick, and you really get a sense of the watch when viewed from this angle. Andrew, let's zoom out a little bit, show it proportionally against my full arm. This is a watch that wears really well on any wrist. And if I have to recommend just one watch on the table tonight, even considering my Grail watch Zeitwerk, I would say go with this one. There are plenty of Zeitwerks in the world. There are only 500 of those, and that's the first one I've seen in 5 years of doing this. JLC, however, well represented on the table with a former Grail watch of mine, a big-time love affair that lasted 8 years from the first time I saw it to the time it left my hands. I saved for 4 years to buy this watch and got it back in 2014. Now, this is not mine. Mine was number 83, and it's found a new warm home. I'm in touch with the new owner. 42 millimeters, 200 pieces, a 2010 limited series. This is the best version of JLC's most important modern watch. A matte black granular dial. You can see the foudroyant for the chronograph, both center time for the civil time and center seconds for the chronograph, a mono counter with chronograph minutes as well as hours, and you could see that there is also a single-digit minutes register for the chronograph system. Power reserve for the time, power reserve for the chronograph. It's a mono pusher, so you freeze it. You have chronograph single-digit minutes, tens of minutes, hours, seconds, and sixths of seconds. Reset everything. Set it back in action. By the way, you can run this one full-time if you have it. A double-finished case flank with black polished lugs welded on and a satin-finished case. And on the case back, caliber 380. A column wheel chronograph with German silver bridges, or since we are in the canton of Vaud, Maillechort. Nickel copper zinc with that lovely copper alloy, giving it the golden hue you saw in the Langes. Now you see twin mainspring barrels, 50-hour power reserve for both, a free spring balance beaten away at 21.6, and Côte de Soleil radiating out from that balance, the focal point of the stripes on the bridges. Now, two movements, Powertrain and power source. Powertrain and power source. They intersect at the single anchor, which switches them on and off alternately, powering the time of day and the chronograph function. Throw it on the wrist. It was always a big watch by my standards, but wearable. 13 plus thick. You can see it's 42 millimeters in diameter and about 50 millimeters from lug to lug. The lug shape makes it wearable on a smaller wrist, and I always enjoyed wearing this watch for its solidity and its impressive wrist presence. This is Darth Vader for your wrist. Just overpowering. I love that watch. Now, I owned this reference as well, and once again, this was not mine. Mine was Kinky Reference 69, or I should say serial number 69. This is the Master Grand Memovox, 250 pieces, 41.5 millimeters in platinum. It came out in the year 2000, and you can see JLC was doing cool blue dials long before, well, blue dials were cool. It features a hanging bronze gong alarm internally, and I'm going to let you hear that bronze gong right now. It's got a lot of punch, and it'll sound for almost 30 seconds. I used to use this one to wake me up for red eyes out of Geneva after SIHH. It is incredibly vocal, and not only that, but this is the Kurt Claus perpetual calendar system. Mechanically coordinated, all you use is a single adjuster tool, and you step everything in sync. So all you need to do is set the current date. You never need to look up the day, the date, and the phase of the moon, and then try to set your watch. It's an easy watch to wear. As you can see, it features half-frosted alpha hands for contrast against the blue base. Throw it on the wrist, and you can see it's got a lot of presence, but it's wearable. It's a large 41.5. The lug profile is strong, but with the solid case back and the full platinum clasp, the watch feels almost like a 44 on the wrist. It's one of those great pleasures of wearing a platinum watch that you're constantly aware of it, though it's never grating or obtrusive. The case back is also solid, meaning you're getting a lot of platinum here. And of course, prior to 2006, when JLC debuted its third generation deployant clasp, when you got a platinum JLC, you got a platinum folding clasp, and this was the last of that breed, so platinum to match platinum. JLC doing things the right way back then. All right, let's talk about a watch that is just bonkers in every way a watch can be bonkers. I don't know how to describe this watch other than to say it is very Russian on every level. This is the 2013 50-piece limited edition Gagarin Tourbillon. Yes, that Gagarin, Yuri Gagarin, the first spaceman back in 1961, April 12th, 1961. The cosmonaut flew around the Earth in orbit, and you could see both the UTC time of his launch and his landing on the caseback of this 46.6 millimeter rose gold tourbillon timepiece. Designed by Bernard Lederer, co-founder and member of the AHCI, the Cool Kids Club of independent watchmakers, it is a loving tribute to a milestone moment in human history. I've always said that with Gagarin, the dream of tens of thousands of generations of human beings of leaving the bounds of the Earth and flying into space, he realized that dream, and in 300 years, no one will remember his politics and everyone will remember his name. What sets this watch apart is the flying tourbillon, which has an upper bridge but not a lower bridge, and it makes one circuit of the dial for every 108 minutes. That is the length of the orbit of Gagarin's Vostok 1 spacecraft. There is also a built-in loop that allows you to more easily admire the qualities of the hand-finished dial, as well as the aventurine cosmos outboard of that lovely hand-finished and lacquered world beneath. Now you can also see the tourbillon, which is in the form of the Gagarin Memorial at Engels, Russia, which is this huge sweeping upward arc, and that's what the memorial looks like. If you look carefully, you can even see outboard of the tourbillon the letters Vostok. Now let's wind it up and fire it up, because you really can't appreciate this watch until you see it in motion. Now the tourbillon's in action, beating away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. And it's a lovely thing to see because it's so highly animated. When you set the watch, I'll cut to the chase, you could see that you're able to set the watch independently of the tourbillon's movement. Though, make no mistake, the tourbillon will orbit the dial just as Gagarin orbited the Earth. Throw it on the wrist, and you can see it's huge. It's 18.9 millimeters thick, and a lot of that comes down to the immense camber of the crystal. You can see the crystal is about 1/3 the actual thickness of the watch. The pincer-like claws that frame the case almost look like the settings for a gem in a ring. And as you can see, incredibly, it fits. It's 52 millimeters lug to lug, but the lug shape is friendly. Not just a lug to lug span experiment, but a lug shape experiment. Bernard Lederer has made this watch wearable. It has a manual wind, 80-hour power reserve, so impressive autonomy considering the complication. And it's just a ton of fun to see. It is a horological toy for big boys, rather than, strictly speaking, a watch. You will watch it, but you will not care about the time. And I'm finishing with my biggest gun. No, not a grand complication, and not a six-figure watch, but perhaps the most charismatic and well-known dial in all of watchmaking. And yes, all apologies to FP, but it's not the Chronomètre Bleu. You know it, I know it, not as the SBGA 211, but as the Snowflake. 41 millimeters in titanium. This is the Grand Seiko Spring Drive Automatic SBGA 211, a dial created in 6 separate steps to emulate the chaotic drifts of blown snow outside of Grand Seiko's northern Japan studios where the watch and its movement are made. It has an incredible rusticated texture, and I'll do my best to show you. You can see probably best from that angle. Andrew, can we get even closer? Is it possible? Maybe you can't get closer, but I can. I'm going to move in a little bit. 3-day power reserve, spring drive automatic. You can see that fire-blued steel seconds hand sweeping over the lovely rusticated drifts, the eddies and the dips of that Snowflake dial. You have a Zaratsu tin plate hand-polished case in 41 millimeter titanium. You have a dial with hand-finished, micrometrically diamond tip polished hands and indices. A watch that's handmade inside and out with the soul of a mechanical watch thanks to its spring-driven system and mechanical drivetrain. And you can see through the case back the movement. Part of the 9R series. Let me try to get that sticker out of the way. Part of the 9R series. Automatic winding, 3-day power reserve, 100 meters water resistant, and with a precision of plus or minus 15 seconds a month. And I end with the Snowflake wrist shot because, guys, Grand Seiko has earned this. The valedictorian of today's show, the winner and still champion of the Dial Wars. It's the Snowflake. All right, guys, I can't match that. That has to be the sign-off. The best I can do. Thanks to you, thanks to my crew, Time Out, Tim Out. Thanks for logging on, and I'll see you this Sunday.